So the government of Albania, that's a small Balkan country, today apparently it suspended a massive hotel and resort project amid protests. Why is that important? Why is it significant? Well, the people who were buying this and developing this resort project were none other than Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner, as well as some financiers from the Gulf. This is a really wild story. You're going to want to hear and you're going to want to listen in to what I know about this story. And you're not going to get this version of what's happening in Albania and why it's happening from the mainstream media. They're simply not going to report on this particular angle. I have reported in Albania. I know the country. I have some sources there and I spoke to them, and I have a great little accounting for what is happening in the country and why this hotel project came up and why it actually threatens not just the government in Albania, the government of Prime Minister Eddie Rama, but also has wider geopolitical implications, including for Israel, Iran, and the Gulf states. I'm Borsu Dergahi. This is my podcast. It's called Badlands. By the time you get this, it'll be Thursday, June 4th, 2026. Before we get into Albania, just a little bit of an update on what's happening in the Persian Gulf with Iran and the U.S. and so on. As people probably know already, the U.S. tried to attack a boat, a freighter. It actually did attack it. It shot at the engine room of a oil freighter that was apparently trying to load up in Iran's Khark Island. And Iran responded by striking an American ship in return. It was a kind of tit-for-tat escalation. Then the United States took it a step further. It launched airstrikes on communications equipment in Iran's Qeshm Island, and maybe it was anticipating that that would be the end of it. Maybe it thought that Iran would respond meekly or in a likewise manner. But Iran did something that the Americans did not expect, but that I've been warning and other people have been warning about for some time now, for weeks, that Iran is not afraid of escalating, that actually there are factions inside Iran who are arguing for escalation. They're saying, let's go back to war. The Americans haven't suffered enough. The Israelis haven't suffered enough. Their Gulf allies haven't suffered enough. The Iranians launched a series of airstrikes and drone swarms against Kuwait and Bahrain. They said that they were targeting U.S. facilities in those two countries. But one piece of damage that we saw and some injuries that came about were at Kuwait's international airport that was struck. The Kuwaitis were quite upset about the attacks. There was also reports that Iran launched attacks against U.S. facilities in Erbil, but that has not been totally confirmed yet. The Iranians have said on social media and in news reports, from now on, whenever you attack us, we're going to respond with an equal attack times 0.5. So they're going to reply 1.5. So what they're saying is that our response is still going to be calibrated, but it's going to be more than what you did. So basically, what they're doing there is a military strategy. They're taking away the force escalation dominance from the Americans. They're saying that you can't push us into submission. Whatever you do, we're going to do more, and we're going to attack you harder. This is what people have been warning about, that the Trump administration has been lying when they say that Iran is a paper tiger and its forces have been degraded and that it doesn't have any weapons left, that its military is gone. This is just bogus. And you hear these cabinet ministers, these cabinet secretaries, you see Marco Rubio, Pete Hegseth, they get on the Hill and they make these claims. And, we critical people, we are looking at this and we're saying this is BS. But I think people in the government, some people in the government, especially a lot of people who watch TV uncritically and other Americans, they just kind of believe it. Because why would the Americans lie? Why would my officials lie about what we've done in this war? What incentive do they have to lie to the American people? Some people are still naive like that, believe it or not, and they believe it. So I think that the situation in the Persian Gulf is still very dangerous. Potential for escalation is very high, very high. And that's because the Iranians, it's not because of the Americans. I don't believe, Donald Trump's bluster anymore. But I kind of believe the crazy Iranian generals who are ascendant now, and they are on Telegram channels screaming for war. And that is really a dangerous issue because they are determined to hurt the Americans further. And don't look at Ghalibaf, Mohammed Bagher Ghalibaf, he's the Speaker of Parliament, or this nice guy, Abbas Arakci, the foreign minister. These are the front guys. They're the guys in the front office putting on a somewhat nice and acceptable face of the Iranian regime. But in reality, there's some really hardcore people who are in the back room running the operations. And those people are ready for war, and they're ready for a real war. I don't know how much more I can emphasize this, but they want war. They want the US to invade. They want to die gloriously fighting against the Americans and the Israelis. And they are eager for that. And so what the Americans don't seem to understand, and the bad information they're getting, is that the Iranians are this paper tiger, and that we've, finished off their military and there's nothing left, that it's just a matter of crossing some T's and putting some I's on a final negotiated settlement. No, the Iranians are not going to buckle to any settlement that makes Trump look good. They're going to maybe try to give him some face-saving way of presenting any deal that comes out of it, but they would rather, if it's a choice between a deal that makes the Iranians look weak and like they lost the war, even if they didn't, or getting a war and escalation and conflict and months more of fighting, there's people in Iran who would choose the fighting. On this issue of Albania, this is a really corrupt little country in the Balkans. It's a lovely place, though. It's a really lovely country. And it's shocking how cool it is, how nice it is, how European-oriented the people are. They have this very moderate Muslim religion. There's a lot of Greek culture there. There's a lot of Italian culture, a lot of Italian influence, as well as Balkan influence. It's a wonderful place. I should just say at the outset, but it's like really corrupt. And Albanian mafia is infamous throughout Europe, and they run the drug trafficking from Albania around Europe, around the world. In London, for example, the word is like, don't mess with the Albanians, because they're super violent, super well connected. There are definitely factions in organized crime international networks that are completely dominated by the Albanians. They're not to be trifled with. They're not to be messed with. So what you have is a situation that since 2013, you've got this guy, Eddie Rama. He's been the prime minister. He's dominated politics there. He's become this sort of Trumpian figure where he has manipulated the political establishment to keep rubber stamping his policies and his rule. He has a majority in parliament that he keeps rewriting the rules to maintain. Sound familiar with the Republicans and their gerrymandering efforts? There's been huge accusations that he's been selling off the country. And then something else happened. At some point, maybe in the late 2010s, the Americans, through a deal, moved the Mujahideen Halt organization. That is the MKO. That's this Iranian opposition group that was based in northern Iraq. Under some terms that John Kerry, the Secretary of State, came up with, this group was moved from northern Iraq to a camp in Albania. This was an agreement that John Kerry put together and put these guys there, where these Mujahideen Halt guys were and probably still are running operations, running psychological warfare operations, organizing efforts against the Islamic Republic of Iran from Albania. And many people in Albania really objected to what they were like, what is going on here? Why is our country being used for this purpose? Another accusation was that the MKO was basically running its own state. It was running its own parallel state. Like the police weren't allowed to go onto this compound that they had. They kept buying up land around this compound. It's just to the west of Tirana in this kind of desolate area. And they kept expanding and expanding. And there was a lot of questions about where their money was coming from. Saudi Arabia at the time, and possibly Israel. Perhaps even currently, but no one's quite sure. There was all sorts of allegations, all sorts of defectors who told of horror stories that were going on inside this camp, and yet the police were not allowed to go in there. It was like off limits. It was like their little autonomous state that they were given with a little bit of diplomatic protection. Another thing that started happening in Eddie Rama's Albania is that he started making more and more business deals with Israel and started making more and more defense tech deals. Now, Albania is not a member of the EU, but it is a member of NATO. So it has that blessing of being part of NATO, and Israel can work with it. There's accusations that a lot of the contracts for tech and high tech were being given to Israeli companies and Israeli oligarchs or international oligarchs connected to Israel in some way. There were other worrying developments as well. Eddie Rama was pitching the country as a moderate version of Islam. What I learned about Albania when I was there is that there were Shias and there were Christians, but they would grow up together and they wouldn't even know who's a Shia or who's a Christian until one asked the other one to marry them. Like that's how unimportant religion was. But Eddie Rama has been kind of messing with the DNA of that cultural aspect and trying to promote the country as this moderate Muslim nation that could serve as a model for other countries. It just sounds like a lot of the kind of rhetoric that is promoted by the United Arab Emirates and certain right-wing figures in the United States. There was Eddie Rama's decision to join Donald Trump's Board of Peace. This was something that many European countries just stayed the heck away from. But for some reason, Eddie Rama thought it was important for him to join with Donald Trump on this Board of Peace that has served as nothing more than a cover story for the Israeli dispossession and continued violence against the people of Gaza. So these were other aspects that were making people uncomfortable. And then at some point, through Tony Blair, is what my source is telling me, Eddie Rama was introduced to Jared Kushner and his whole circle of people. This was probably around 2020, 2021, 22. And there was a kind of deal that they were going to set up this resort in this area. And it's one of the most beautiful areas of Albania. If you look at a map, Albania is on the Adriatic Sea. There's this beautiful coastline there. And there is this island and a peninsula. And through this land giveaway, as some people are calling it, Eddie Rama's government is giving this island, it's called Sazan, and this peninsula off of the city of Vlora. The deal is basically with the Gulfies and Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump. And what they would do is invest $4 billion to create these resorts on this island and on this peninsula. The Saudis would be involved in the island resort and the Qataris would be on the peninsula. And there was no real public process for this. There was no discussion and so on. And this land giveaway was basically not legitimate, according to many people. This land it belonged to farmers and they were using it for agricultural reasons. And all of a sudden, just last weekend, there was fences put up around this area. And the people were basically saying that you're stealing a whole bunch of territory. So these people who were using this land on the peninsula that was about to be given away to Qatar, as well as environmentalists who were concerned about what would happen by building a resort on this pristine island, they basically had these little protests. And what happened was that the protests were brutally crushed, but not by police, not by Albanian police, by the private security forces that Jared Kushner uses, by a private security company that was associated with Jared Kushner. And these videos went totally viral. This was on Saturday. And then all of a sudden there was a massive protest in the city of Tirana, in the capital, over the last few days. There's been daily protests, and these protests erupted into like hundreds of thousands of people. And they became really big and they became really uproarious. People started protesting not just against this real estate deal, not just against these resorts, not just against the environmental and economic impact of these resorts, but also against Eddie Rama's government and his very close relationship with Israel. And this has been shown in some of the footage of the protests and so on. You see that they are essentially accusing Eddie Rama of being a puppet of Benjamin Netanyahu, and all of this stuff, all of these concerns about Eddie Rama and his connection to Israel and his turning the country basically into the United Arab Emirates of the Balkans. It has all come together. And I have to say, some of the imagery that I've seen and some of the slogans that people are saying in Tirana are like straight up anti-Semitic and unacceptable. But it's just an explosion of anger that has come out. It's not helpful that Jared Kushner is considered like a very close friend of Benjamin Netanyahu and part of like the global Jewish oligarchic elite. That feeds into this ugly stereotype that people are using on the streets of Tirana, which is unacceptable. But essentially, it's this big explosion and a big setback for Israel to have this project rejected and this, more than anything, this awareness coming about, this awakening of the people of Albania, or this reframing of their point of view in Albania against Eddie Rama's close association with Israel. And that's going to connect to the MKO, the Mujahideen Khalq, this weird cult-like anti-Iranian regime organization that's based there. This is going to have an impact there. What's crazy is that just like a day or two ago, there was an interview with Eddie Rama saying, as long as I'm present, this deal is going forward. And then the protests just got so out of hand and that people were so angry that they basically suspended the whole project. You had these videos of Jared Kushner and Ivanka themselves talking so smugly about this project, how it's going to be this really elite resort. I'd call it like a version of Epstein Island where billionaires can go, a playground for the super, super rich and super wealthy, and using land that the environmentalists really cherished. Apparently there's wetlands there. There's several species of rare fauna. And so people are really upset and different constituencies are coming together. And there's also this big Israeli Albania football match that's supposed to take place. And there's a lot of worries in Albania that will erupt in violence. And apparently Israeli security forces are arriving in Albania, and that's creating even more tension. So I think that is one of the reasons also that the government is suspending this $4 billion deal, even after all this hype from Ivanka and Jared and all this talk about he's never going to stop this deal as long as he can. I really want to credit Olsi Jazekci. He is an Albanian journalist and historian who has long been speaking about these matters. And I had met him when I was in Albania, and he talked a little bit back then about the uncomfortable Israeli influence that was coming to Albania and the pressures that the country was under. And I didn't really report on that. I thought it was a little far-fetched at that time, like 2018, 19, and so on. But, he had a point, it turns out. And this guy has been such a thorn in the side of the government that they drove him out of his university job. He had a really good job at the university in Albania, and now he's basically teaching in exile in Malaysia, where he's a professor, and he also goes back to Albania occasionally. But I really want to thank him for talking to me and briefing me a little bit. He gets a lot of credit for the reporting in this piece. On a slightly lighter but interesting note as well, there's been a lot of discussion about the upcoming World Cup and Iran's plans to play in the World Cup. The United States, Canada, and Mexico are playing host to the World Cup. And that's kind of a complicated situation because Iran is technically in a state of war with the United States. Its team members are going to play in the United States, games in Los Angeles and Washington State, Seattle, and perhaps more if Iran can get past the first round in the games. I spoke actually with India's NewsX about the complications that could arise as Iran heads out to the United States for the World Cup. Listen in or watch.
Football and high-stakes diplomacy are colliding ahead of the 2026 tournament. Questions are mounting over the logistical handling of the Iranian national team amidst ongoing, highly charged geopolitical and military tensions with the United States. We're now joined by Borzu Daragahi, an Iranian-American journalist and founder of the Badlands newsletter. He's joining us live from Istanbul. Borzu, thank you very much for joining us once again on NewsX World. From a sporting perspective, how significant is it, that logistical challenge compared with teams that can stay and train in one location throughout the tournament?
Well, I'm not a football team manager, but I imagine it would be rather difficult. It will be kind of tough, especially since the Americans are saying that they can't stay overnight. Like, they're welcome to come to Los Angeles and Seattle for matches, but they have to be back across the border in the evening. This is a kind of draconian condition that they're putting on the Iranian team. And it's also kind of unsurprising. This administration, the Trump administration, is known for breaking norms like this and abusing events like this for propaganda value. I think also the Iranian team will also be under certain pressure from the Iranian side as well. Their greatest fear will be for members of the team to defect, to essentially ask for asylum in the United States. And so they're going to be nervous for that. Both sides are going to be using this event for propaganda purposes.
There's also reports suggesting that Iranian officials with alleged links to the Revolutionary Guards will not be permitted to travel with the delegation, while FIFA and national federations have been working through some visa complications. Does this situation expose the difficulties of staging a truly global tournament when international politics does become difficult to separate from sport?
Well, I think it shows the difficulty of staging this kind of event when you have the Trump administration. I think that is the problem. They're relentless in trying to weaponize everything and trying to turn a simple sporting event into some kind of political football, so to speak, not to use the wrong term there, but to sort of use this as a way to get some propaganda points, to harass the Iranians a little bit, to humiliate them as this ongoing conflict is happening. There was some talk of moving the games that the Iranians were supposed to play to Mexico and Canada, which are both also part of the tournament and part of the competition, but that talk seemed to go nowhere, and in fact the Iranians will be required to play in the United States, which, as it looks right now, will be locked in some kind of armed conflict with Iran at the time that these games are going on.
Iran were also among the earliest teams to qualify for the 2026 World Cup, but much of the conversation has been about visas, border crossings and geopolitics, particularly with the start of the Iran war, rather than football. Now, how disruptive has this uncertainty been for this team's preparations, and how can a team realistically compete at the highest level when so much off-field attention surrounds them?
I mean, these guys they're football players. They're big stars. They're kind of princesses. I think they're, kind of pampered 20-something-year-olds and even teens who are, driving around in really nice cars, working for really good teams. They're stars in their communities, stars in the teams that they play for. I'm sure they're kind of insulated from some of the worst of the political abrasions. But, Iranians are football mad. They're crazy about football. And they, as you pointed out, were among the first teams to qualify for the World Cup. They play in the Asian League, and they qualified in the Asian segment of the games, which is a little tougher than the European ones and the Latin American ones, obviously. But, yet nevertheless, they qualified, and they're intensely proud of that. They're intensely proud of their football players. Some of them go on, after playing in Iran, to play in big teams across Europe and Asia. So, it'll be an event. It'll be a spectacle in that sense for everybody. I think there'll be the football players themselves will be focused on playing as well as they can, bringing up their star value, and showing a good time for the fans in the stadiums.
And if we look purely at the football, Iran have had a very turbulent road to the World Cup, of course, including many complications, including visa concerns, the backdrop of the Iran war as well. What would constitute a win for the Iranian team this time round at the World Cup?
I mean, even if they're showing up and they play the game successfully, I think that would probably for the Iranians constitute a win. And I got to say, even for the players themselves, whether they win or lose, just making it to the World Cup, going through the whole ritual and the spectacle is a win for the players, a win for the fans, and so on. But it would be nice if they could make it to the second round after the round of 4. They've never, I don't think, made it past that round in the history of the World Cup. And if they made it, that would be astounding and that would be earth-shattering. Hey, thanks a lot. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Badlands. Please subscribe if you haven't already. I'm at borzu.substack.com. You can also find me on YouTube and on Spotify and on Apple Podcasts.